The Amerks are still alive. We'll get into the game against the Bears and a Stanley Cup Final preview coming up on Locked On Sabres.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on today's show, and we've got a lot to get to, including the Rochester Americans playing into the month of June. It is June 1st, and the Amerks are still alive. A win, Game 5 in Hershey. We'll get into it coming up in a little bit here on the show. Also, on today's show, a full preview of the Stanley Cup Final between the Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. The former Sabre Bowl, Jack Eichel versus Sam Reinhart. One thing that I'll want to get into is what it will feel like if Eichel does hoist the Stanley Cup, because we are 4 wins away, Vegas wins away from that happening. And I don't know how I'm going to feel, and I wonder how fans are going to feel if that does get there, because we are getting closer. So all that coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you want to follow the podcast account, check us out on the socials at Locked On Sabres on Twitter. Go to YouTube, type in Locked On Sabres. You can find the show there. You can find this the subscribe button, hit like and subscribe, and we've got the comment section for you as well, which we always love to read questions and comments from there. Before we get into, though, Eichel and the Golden Knights and the Panthers, remember I got my futures bet on the Florida Panthers, so I'll be rooting hard for Florida just on that front. The Amerks are playing into the month of June, a 4-1 win over the Hershey Bears on Wednesday night. And they are going to be playing Game 6 Friday night, to try and force a Game 7. Game 7 against Hershey would take place on Sunday in Hershey. 4-1 win by the Amerks. Now, before we get into the game itself, the lineup notes for this game were not all that surprising. They did dress 7 defensemen for the first time all playoffs, but no Matthew Savoy, no Ryan Johnson, and I think Seth Appert, Amerks head coach, is now at a point where he's probably not going to turn back to the young guys that have not been with the team throughout the entire season. I think Savoy, barring injury, probably not going to re-enter the lineup. And Ryan Johnson, my guess would be he's probably not going to enter the lineup. They'll practice with the team over the next, could be only a couple days or it could be weeks, not knowing how long Rochester's going to play here. But I don't think we're going to see Savoy again. Just a hunch. 4-1, Jiri Kulich gets on the scoreboard for the first time in this series. I will say, though, he did play better, I think, overall, the whole game. Isaac Rosen played better, too. Rosen had a stretch where he came in on a breakaway, hit the post, had another scoring chance immediately after. He easily could have had a goal or two in this game. Kulich could have had a couple of goals in this game. The one goal he did score, not really much to do with it. It was a wrist shot from distance along the ice. I mean, it was Hunter Shepard, the Bears goaltender. He let in some soft goals in this game, which is amazing because the previous game, he looked like the best goalie you've ever seen, stopping everything that came his way. This game let in a couple of soft ones, and that first goal that Kulich scored, I mean, he's coming in by himself, 1-on-3, and he enters the Bears zone. And before he's even at the face-off circle, he is at a distance. This is the type of play where, as a coach, I'd want to look at that play with him in film and say, hey, I know you scored on this play, but you should not be taking the shot. This should be a dump into the corner and chase, try to establish zone time. This should be you skate to the wall, try to buy time so your teammates can jump up with you. This should be, hey, chip it to the middle of the slot. See if you can get there first before the defenseman or the goaltender. Don't settle for that shot. That is maybe a learning experience for Kulich, despite the fact that he scored, because the guys trying to make the NHL, That goal is never going in the NHL. Never, ever, ever going in the NHL. And it really shouldn't even go in the AHL. But, man, Hunter Shepard really let in a soft one there. So, not to take all credit away from Kulich on that play, because, again, I thought he had a good game, but that goal was not an example of him having a good game. But he did get the goal scoring going. Then, the Amerks get a goal from Michael Mersch. Michael Rousek actually is the goal that made it 2-0. Then the Bears started to pour it on a little bit in the third for a stretch, and they got the 2-1 goal. And when they got the 2-1 goal after a nice stretch of play, didn't you think it was about to be Game 4 again? Game 4 where the Amerks collapsed for it was really for 2 periods, but in the last 10 minutes, letting 3 goals in to lose the game. I thought this was about to happen again. But they buckled down after that. Michael Mersch is able to score a goal from a bad angle. It was another goal that I thought Shepard should have stopped. And the Amerks were able to get the empty netter then with Rousek and able to win the game 4-1. Good play overall, pretty evenly matched game. Malcolm Subban had to make some incredible saves. He has been unbelievable for the Amerks throughout these playoffs, and he definitely outplayed the Bears goalie Hunter Shepard in this game by a lot. Another player that ends up with 2 goals on the night, one of them was an empty netter, Lukas Rousek. He is now up to 12 points in 13 games played in these Calder Cup playoffs. 5 goals, 7 assists in 13 games. Rousek, who scored on his opening shift, remember, for the Buffalo Sabres, his first shift of his NHL career earlier this season, has been unbelievable in these playoffs. And he's, providing the Amerks all the two-way play that you could ask for. He's been great. Now, I'm thinking about Rousek more and more as these games go on. I'm watching him very intently, trying to figure out, okay, can this guy be a Zemgus Girgensons replacement? Can he be a guy that is a regular on the Sabres next season? Now, he's scoring a bunch of goals this year. He was just under a point a game on the season. I don't think that would be his role with the Sabres, of course. I think they would be more for the penalty killing and the defensive play and the physicality. But it is worth pointing out that he's found the scoring touch for the Amerks this season. In those 2 games, and it had me thinking, he scored 2 goals last night, and it got me thinking, let me go back and look at those 2 games that he played for the Sabres. He played 2 games for the Sabres. How close could he be? Could he be a good idea for this? Well, how did he play in those 2 games? Because we know he scored in his first shift. He had another assist. He had a goal, so a goal and an assist in 2 games played. 22 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time this year, Lukas Rousek. 6th-round pick, by the way, of the Sabres, 2019. All right, let me look at those games again. What did he do? And if you look a little bit deeper, if you watch the play, his play itself, he's not standing out in a big way, but he's not making mistakes. He was making good play and making good plays in his own end. I thought that cycle he had in the offensive zone that you've seen from Girgensons and Okposo over the years, where they're not really generating a ton of chances, but they're maintaining puck possession. I saw a lot of that from Rousek, working the boards, playing physically, and he was not outmatched physically in his 2 games in the NHL. He's a good-sized player, and he's not really that young. I mean, he's 24 years old. He's not some kid, a teenager out there. Like, he's fully formed. So he had that going for him, too. And the numbers were incredible in his 2 games for the Sabres. In those 22 minutes at 5-on-5 for the Sabres, Lukas Rousek, 65.2% expected goals for percentage. Through the roof. Unbelievable. Shot attempts for the Sabres when Rousek was on the ice. 19 for Buffalo, 15 for the opponent. Scoring chances when Rousek was on the ice. 11 for Buffalo, 8 for the opponent. And high danger scoring chances, 5 for when Rousek was on the ice, 3 for the opponent when he was out there. So he was really great. Just flat out, he was great in those 2 games with the Buffalo Sabres. So training camp will help determine more of this. The rest of the playoffs will help determine this. It could only be 1 more game, but Amerks next in action Friday night, Blue Cross Arena in Rochester, 7:05 puck drop. MSG carrying that game once again if you're looking for it. And hopefully we'll have a Game 7 in Hershey. Now, one other Amerks thing to get to before we take a timeout and get to the Stanley Cup Final. Jason Karmanos, Amerks GM and Sabres assistant GM, appears to be safe. It appears as though he's going to remain in the Sabres organization. Here's what I mean. We now know all of these GMs openings have been filled. Kind of. The Calgary Flames hired Craig Conroy. That was, early in the week or last week, so we knew that. And I don't think Karmanos was ever in the running for that job. But the two jobs Karmanos was in the running for, and if you've heard me on Karmanos, I think he is vital to this organization. He is an up-and-coming executive. I'm not sure how much longer he'll last. Maybe this is going to be his last season as AGM for the Sabres. He's an up-and-coming guy. Helped build the Sabres analytics department, right? He brought in the guy since Sam Ventura that has built the Sabres analytics department. So he's analytically inclined. I love that. I love how data-driven he is. I think he's definitely been a big help to Kevin Adams because of his Karmanos' hockey executive background, which is much lengthier than Adams is. Adams is just Sabres GM, and Karmanos, he goes back 10 plus years. So Toronto hires Brad Treleving. Pretty uninspiring hire. Former Flames GM, didn't do a whole lot of great there. A decade long in Calgary, they won 2 playoff series. Okay, Toronto, you think that's your idea? Good luck. I thought that's a super uninspiring hire, but good. Now, Karmanos, not a thought for Toronto. Well, what about Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh is the one where the door is kind of closed, but maybe not entirely. In Pittsburgh, they have hired Kyle Dubas, former Leafs GM. But what we did not know until this morning, Thursday morning, is that Kyle Dubas is not going to be the Penguins general manager. Kyle Dubas' role with the Penguins is president of hockey operations, which means there's going to be a GM to come in underneath of Dubas. Now, what Dubas said in his introductory press conference is that he's going to serve as GM until July. And after the draft, after free agency, he's going to look into, quote, progressive candidates, is the way Dubas put it. Karmanos could fit the billing of a progressive candidate. So maybe he is still in danger of being hired away from the Sabres, but not until July, after free agency, after the NHL draft. One thing that might point you to, all right, maybe it won't be him, though, is I looked. Kyle Dubas has no working experience with Jason Karmanos. That doesn't mean that the Penguins couldn't be in his ear about how good this guy is and he's the guy you want. And it could be Dubas, he doesn't have to necessarily hire a guy he's worked with. He could know Karmanos. He could know his background. He wants a progressive candidate. Dubas is someone that's going to want a good analytics department. He built that in Toronto. He is going to want someone that is analytically inclined, and Karmanos fits all of those billings. So worth watching Pittsburgh still if they could hire him away. But I'm going to guess that they're going to go in a different direction, but we'll see when July comes, whenever they want to make that decision. So for now, though, Jason Karmanos remains with the Amerks and with the Sabres. Time out here when we come back. Preview of the Stanley Cup Final. I got some thoughts on this series. I think it's going to be an electric series. Put your Sabre hatred or your former Sabre hatred at the door, because there's some good hockey on the way between Vegas and Florida. We'll talk about it when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, and we are presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. It's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Love all the promotions every day that FanDuel has, whether that's odds boosts or, parlay insurance and other things like that. I have my Stanley Cup future on the Florida Panthers. I've been looking at that cash out option. You love having the cash out option. Anytime you want to get out of a bet, you've got that option for you. And it's provided by FanDuel. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon, and you'll get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Saturday night is game 1 between the Vegas Golden Knights and the Florida Panthers. 2 teams, one of which will win their first ever Stanley Cup. The Golden Knights only, 6 years into their existence here, and the Panthers about 30 years into their existence here. In fact, it might be their 30th anniversary, something like that. I think, speaking of FanDuel, I think the Panthers should actually be favored in this series. They're not, but it's very close. Plus 110 if you wanted to bet the Panthers in this series. I think there is some amazing hockey on the way. Both of these teams are able and willing to play shootout style hockey up and down the ice. There is a lot of talent on display between these two teams. The Golden Knights rolling out the lines of Eichel and Marchessault and Barbashev, and then the way William Karlsson is playing right now with Riley Smith and Chandler Stevenson and Mark Stone, of course, who I should have mentioned like right near the top. And Florida, the way Florida's going right now, Matthew Tkachuk is playing like the second best player in the world behind Connor McDavid, and Sam Reinhart's playing great, and Sam Bennett is playing lights out. Sasha Barkov has got things going in the playoffs. There is so much talent and skill on display between these two teams. And another reason why you might think you could be in store for some fireworks, there is a potential for goaltender to be a bit of a mess. Now, that has not been the case so far in these playoffs. Sergei Bobrovsky's been unbelievable, and Adin Hill has actually been really good as well. Adin Hill, in 9 games started in these playoffs, has a 937 save percentage. He's been unbelievable. But what we have here, in essence, is a 4th-string goalie in Adin Hill and a goalie in Bobrovsky who historically has been very unreliable when it comes to the playoffs. So you might get one falling apart in the finals, or you might get 2, or you might get 0. But there's a chance. But it's more about the talent up front between these two teams that I think is going to have some exciting hockey. I will say about Vegas, I have that Panthers future bet. I am very tempted to pick the Golden Knights to win this series because they really run 3 lines deep a lot better than the Panthers do, in my opinion. The Golden Knights, right now, that Eichel-Marchessault combination is unstoppable. Eichel, one thing, maybe you have just been avoiding him. I've done a lot of that, in these playoffs. I've still watched enough, though, to know the numbers, too, that if you haven't been watching him, you might be surprised to learn he's maybe made a bigger impact as a shutdown centerman than he actually even has as an offensive force. I mean, he's been great offensively. Eichel's got 18 points in 17 games. He leads the Golden Knights with just over a point a game, but he's not that far away in the field. Like, there are 6 Golden Knights that have 14 or more points in these playoffs. So Eichel's kind of led the pack, but they're all right there. Defensively, he's been unreal. Eichel's been like a Selke front-runner guy in these playoffs. And I think that's a big reason why he's their favorite to win the Conn Smythe. It's not just what he's doing offensively. He is smothering the opposing center that he is going out there against. And Jonathan Marchessault has been playing great as well on that line. Ivan Barbashev, kind of tagging along, but always been a good defensive forward as well. Then they've got the Chandler Stevenson, Mark Stone line, and Brett Howden, again, kind of along for the ride. And then Mike Amadio with William Karlsson and Riley Smith. Karlsson and Smith. What the Golden Knights have figured out here is we've got 3 elite tandems. Eichel and Marchessault, Stevenson and Stone, Karlsson and Smith. Let's not have 2. They could have 2 super lines if they wanted to. But they decided instead, let's go with duos. 3 great duos, and we'll just fill in, the other line made along the way. And that strategy by Bruce Cassidy in Vegas has worked throughout the playoffs, and it has me wanting to believe that they'll get through this because they can roll 3 lines, whereas Florida, that third line is good, but they're not driving possession in quite the same way. Sam Reinhart's on their third line, but he's doing a lot of his damage on the power play. Anton Lundell, Eetu Lutzarinen. I think that line matched up with the William Karlsson, Riley Smith line gets outplayed. But otherwise, I think it's a pretty evenly matched matchup between these two teams again. And the way Matthew Tkachuk is playing right now, he's the best player in the whole series. They have the best player in the series. And that matters. That matters. So I'm on the fence. I might lean. I think I'm going to pick Florida. I mentioned I'm tempted by Vegas. I'm going to pick Florida because even though I lean Vegas with the rest of the lineup, I do trust Bobrovsky to carry the Panthers more than I would trust Hill. If it comes to it where they need a goalie to steal them a game, I mean, I know Aiden Hill's been good. I'm trusting Sergei Bobrovsky way more. He's done it in the playoffs at least once before with Columbus. He's been a Vezina winner. I trust Bobrovsky, and I trust the Panthers to get this done. Bobrovsky over Aiden Hill, a big reason why I would pick them very slightly to win this series. But I think we're going to see some awesome, awesome hockey between two non-traditional hockey markets. But, the NHL might think that's good, trying to grow markets even more. We'll take a timeout here. When we come back, more on the finals, but more so on Eichel. How are we going to feel if Jack Eichel wins the cup? I'll even put a poll up at Locked On Sabres. Are we going to feel indifferent? Are we going to be good for him? I don't know how many people are going to say that. And how many people are just going to want to throw up? That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. Welcome back, Locked On Sabres. Joe DiBiase. Thanks for tuning in to today's show. For you everydayers, next time on the show, we'll pick back up with our exit interviews, and we're almost done, but we're going to the third pair defensemen, Riley Stillman and Ilya Lyubushkin. Next up, we'll break down their futures, whether or not they should even be regulars on this team going forward. They're both under contract, so that's coming up next on the show. But we've got the Stanley Cup Final. We've got Eichel versus Reinhart. It happened. Panthers versus Golden Knights. I wonder how people will feel if Eichel wins the Cup, and even furthermore, if he wins the Conn Smythe. There will be a lot of, for me, I'll just tell you how I think I'll feel about it. It's going to be a tough one. I've watched these playoffs and kind of put him off to the side. I'm not hate watching him. I'm not mad that he's doing good. The Sabres are good now, so I can kind of get past it. But if he lifts the Stanley Cup, that's going to be a struggle. Not even, again, because I'm hate watching him right now, but it's going to dig up a lot of old emotions and feelings about the tank and how bad it went after that and why it went that bad and who's to blame for all of that. I think we're going to regurgitate a lot of that if he wins the Cup. And I'm not sure people really want to do that, but it's just going to happen naturally, if he wins it. Especially that O'Reilly already has one too. It would be, hey man, these two players who were your 1 and 2, they were your leaders. They were your best players. They left and won cups. How did that happen? How did it go so wrong? And we're gonna want to dig a lot of that back up, I think, just naturally, if Eichel wins it. To me, what it will mean and why it will be tough to swallow, it will be proof that the tank was worth it. The whole thesis of the tank was the Sabres didn't have a centerman good enough to win the Stanley Cup. And here would be Eichel proving that he's a number one center good enough to win the Cup with. That would be all the evidence you needed that it was worth it. That would be all the proof that you need. So, and it would dig a lot of that back up. But, man, I would get right to, hey, this is proof in the pudding. It was the coaching. It was the management. It was more the decisions that were made around the players, the core players, than the core players themselves. I think there was a formula for that group to win. But you needed help. Eichel's on a team right now where he's got all the infrastructure around him. He's got a great head coach in Bruce Cassidy. That was proven from his days in Boston. He's got a stable management team above that. He's got a bunch of great forwards all around that lineup. He's got, even more important, this is something the Sabres never had when Jack Eichel was on this team. He's got a stable, reliable, and talented blue line. That never happened in Buffalo for him. Pietrangelo and Shea Theodore and Zach Whitecloud and Nick Hague and Braden McNabb and Alec Martinez. That is a great six. That's a great six of defensemen. He's got all the help he needs. And look, they're in the finals. The Sabres never had a group defensively like that. One stat to point to that is kind of, we're building all this evidence that, hey, it wasn't as much that group of players. For me, at least, it wasn't that. I guess you could make the argument that it was just them together, but I wouldn't want to say that. I would want to say that had their best defenseman been Dahlin, if Dahlin had been, arrived 3 years earlier, wouldn't that group have worked? If Ristolainen wasn't just a sinkhole playing 26 minutes a night? If Don Granato had showed up 3 years earlier, don't we think it would have worked? I do. I give Granato that much credit, by the way, that I think if he showed up 3 years earlier, he would have figured it out. He would have. And the number to point to all of this is, if you look at that core group of Sabres that have left, and that is Jack Eichel, Sam Reinhart, Ryan O'Reilly, Robin Lehner, Evander Kane, Zach Bogosian. That group of 6 players who were all, Bogosian, maybe I'm kind of forcing him in a little bit to boost the number. Maybe it's a little unfair, but Bogosian was playing 23 minutes a night on this team, like top 4 defensemen, all situations. Between those guys, those were the core Sabres at one point in time. Since they've left, that group of 6 have won 28 playoff series. 28 playoff series for different teams. I mean, I don't know. I think all this is going to come back up if Eichel wins. So I'm not necessarily hate watching him. I'll be rooting for the Panthers. I have that future bet. That helps. And also, I think, Reinhart's not playing as important a role as Eichel is. Reinhart winning the cup, he's more well-liked than Eichel is. And he's playing he's on the third line for them. I know he's on the number 1 power play unit, but he's on the third line for them. And I think, it won't feel quite as bad as if Eichel wins and it's, really? Really? And, there will be people out there that will want to take their shots at the Sabres and Buffalo. And that's another reason why, that's not even Eichel's fault on that. But there'll be, whether it's media or if it's fans or bloggers, whoever, players, there will be shots taken at Buffalo, I think, if Eichel wins. And you would avoid that if he doesn't. So let me know how you'd feel. If Eichel wins the cup, you'd feel, maybe you wouldn't feel anything. That could be your answer. At Locked On Sabres on Twitter, if you want to reach out on that. We'll read some of those on the next show. But I mentioned we'll talk Riley Stillman and Ilya Lyubushkin on the next show. We'll break them down. We'll wrap up our exit interviews for the skaters. We'll do a couple goaltenders, of course. After that, have a big goalie episode. And then we'll start getting into free agency and the NHL draft, which are coming up both within a month now. It's June 1st, so we're 1 month away from NHL free agency. So come back for all of that. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to today's show, and we will talk to you next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.